Magic the Gathering is a game we love because it brings us together. And nowhere is this more true than in Commander, a socially interactive multiplayer game that emphasizes fun and gameplay through self-expression via the construction of each player's Commander deck. Each player on their own is a spark. Together, they are a fire which we gather around. A format adored by many Magic the Gathering players incites much passion. The fun that we have as Commander players is something that we are all responsible for helping support. Commander is, after all, a social format, and that means we as players need to be aware of more than just ourselves when it comes to ensuring that all players have a fun experience. Please keep in mind that not everything I am about to outline here will apply to you and the groups you play Commander in. Our community of players is rich and diverse and continues to iterate and expand its understanding of the social contract, rules, and norms that define the Commander format. This video is meant to serve as a guide to help foster thought and ideas on how best to help ensure that this community prospers as it continues to grow. Let's begin with keeping track. A player is responsible for coming to the game prepared and devoting their attention to the game. This means two things: tokens and paying attention. Just as it is our responsibility to come prepared with a Commander deck, it is our responsibility to come with the necessary tokens and tools required to play that deck. After all, your deck will likely include cards that create tokens, cards that exile other cards in different ways, and cards that will require tracking actions taken over the course of a single turn, or perhaps the entire game. When you play a card or cast a spell, you have a responsibility to make that card known to your opponents. For some cards, this requires you to not only read the card name, but what the card does. Likewise, when an opponent plays a card that you are unfamiliar with, you have a responsibility to ask questions and understand that card's effect on other cards currently in play. If your deck has a card that creates tokens, you need to either bring those tokens or a reasonable supply of dry erase tokens, such as infinitokens. If your deck makes multiple different types of tokens, using dice to represent these will create a confused board state. Not only is it confusing to opponents what a single die is meant to represent, it is confusing if that die is tapped or untapped. And that's why, in the same way you have brought and curated all 100 cards of your Commander deck, you need to go through that deck, identify all possible tokens that it creates, and bring copies of those tokens as well. If you use dry erase cards, such as infinitokens, be sure you always clearly express critical information, such as power toughness. If Commander players would do just this one thing and nothing more from this video, games of Commander would be infinitely improved upon across the board. And speaking of your board, players need to clearly define, or perhaps even mark, zones like graveyard, exile, and spells on the stack. You will find that, especially over games of Spell Table, marking zones will bring clarity and flexibility over relying on so-called understood positional conventions. Marking zones can also be very effective at accommodating a deck's play style, like when a spell or ability exiles until end of turn versus until end of next turn, whether it is foretold or off on an adventure, in the command zone, or on the battlefield. Cards often create additional mana that is often expressed as floating mana. A die or dice may be used to express these amounts of mana. The addition of a mana tracker, however, provides the appropriate labels so that it is easier to identify the meaning of the die, and also creates a way to associate it with a color. This is helpful not just to your opponents, but to you as well. Additionally, trackers can be created for cards in a deck to track values like damage to opponents, storm count, remaining lands that can be played, life lost or gained, etc. This helps communicate more clearly the state of the game for each player. For life totals, commander damage, and infect counters, the use of spin downs and other dice are often readily available. But those totals that you track with a spin down can be wiped away with an accidental knock from your hand. Consider the life trackers packaged in the pre-constructed decks, or even better, just pen and paper or a digital tool. Be sure to always use wide-faced, high-contrast dice to indicate counters on permanents on games on spell table. But these are also great for games in real life. Consider that your battlefield is flipped upside down for at least 2 other players. Thus, choosing dice with pips over numbers, as well as a high contrast, greatly reduces confusion. When playing over spell table, place dice on the text of the card, not the image, to allow for the card to be more easily detected by the software. For creatures with power and toughness modified by effects, display the calculated power and toughness with a dry erase card or with dice. This helps as enchantments or equipment are not readable when placed under other permanents. I promise you, if each player took the brief time to do this, Commander games would go both faster and smoother with fewer mistakes and misunderstandings. The effort required by the individual is small, but the results are dramatic when everyone in the playgroup makes this effort. Now let's move on to discuss winning and losing. The goal of any game of Magic the Gathering is to win, but in addition to victory, the goal of a game of Commander is to have fun. This dichotomy is often at the very heart of interpersonal conflicts before, during, and after a game of Commander. The moment that a player wins or loses is one event in the broader experience of time shared with other people. As players, we must accept that there is a winner, and while we may dislike the spells that they cast, the creatures that they attack with, or the planeswalkers that they tick up, it is our responsibility not to transfer our dislike or judgment of those cards to the person playing them. It's important to consider what kind of experience you are after so that you can express that. Not every game will deliver fun for everyone. Variance is inherent to Magic the Gathering. It is often said that Commander is a broken format, and that the only way that it works is if we all pretend that it isn't broken. So whether you win or lose, do so with some level of decorum. While a close circle of friends may allow you to indulge in some playful gloating, or what the kids call smack talk, know that not every group of players will enjoy this. Whether playing with friends or in a group of people unfamiliar to you, it is important that you be respectful towards your fellow players, as well as the actions they took during the game. It should go without saying, though unfortunately it does need to be said, that you are not free to harass or threaten other players. If you find yourself angry at players in your games for the actions that they did or did not take, the cards that they played, or how the game played out, you may find that what you are after is a different playgroup or even a different format, and that's okay. There's a lot of Magic the Gathering out there. The pre-game conversation. Before a game of Commander even begins, each player is responsible for expressing their expectations for desired and undesired gameplay, to describe their deck truthfully to the best of their ability, and to leave the group when those expectations are not met. Sometimes you have to accept that the restrictions you implement may limit your available games. The pre-game conversation is the place for everyone to communicate and negotiate with one another in hopes of creating a more fair and balanced game experience. I am against the use of power levels in pre-game conversation as a way to measure a deck's effectiveness, and instead encourage players to share qualitative descriptions about how their decks operate using other attributes like budget, combos, tutors, and mana bases. Sharing a description of what your deck does informs the table about the style of play, zones it uses, and where it draws its power. As each player shares these descriptions, consider the decks you've selected and determine if any completely stop or deactivate one another. A deck dependent on the graveyard, for example, is not a good match for a deck that is capable of completely deactivating the graveyard. Pre-game conversations are also the time to express the kinds of experiences you do not want to have during the game. Perhaps the last few games you played were won by decks that won suddenly with a combo, or were oppressive in terms of resource denial, and you'd simply prefer a different type of game this time around. During the pre-game conversation, you may find yourself in a situation where you or the other players are absolutely unwilling to compromise. If this is the case, you may always remove yourself from the game and find another game. But remember to express your unwillingness to play against a particular deck sparingly. Other players craft their decks just like you and want to see their efforts realized in a game. Much like trying a food that you assume to be vulgar and repulsive, such as honeydew melon, you may find when you actually try it, you enjoy it. The same is true for decks like stacks. Maybe not stacks. Give the players in the group opportunities to play their favorite decks. Even if it isn't fun for you, every now and then, maybe, try and just let someone else have fun. Over time, you may find yourself, unexpectedly, having fun as well. Overall, this requires that you adopt a perspective that everyone's idea of fun is valued, and that the fun you experience may not always be present in each and every game, but overall will be present in most games. Personal space and communication. Being in the midst of a global pandemic has taught us all the importance of personal space and challenged our ability to communicate with one another. Respect for a player's personal space includes both the physical space around someone and their possessions. Always ask before touching or grabbing a player's cards, playmat, or accessories. Players that respond with a no are not seeking to insult you, and instead ensuring that their needs for mental or physical health are being met. Health and safety are personal matters, as well as public ones, and how someone approaches their own health and safety is their prerogative. Personal grooming and hygiene are important if you are physically meeting with other players. This is an important consideration as players gather closely around a table for a long period of time. If you attend long-running events, consider being sure to groom yourself by showering and wearing a fresh change of clothes before attending the event. And though this can be an embarrassing subject, please place deodorant on yourself before attending these events. Being mindful of how you come across to others is key in all social interactions. Commander is a social format, but it is important to respect the gameplay. Conversations that start spontaneously may need to pause to give the necessary space for a player to describe the actions of their turn. A certain level of awareness is required to ensure that you are able to support the active player or take priority when it is passed to you. This ensures that the game moves along and everyone gets a chance to play. Even when everyone is doing their part, interactions may arise between effects and abilities that create confusion. Players may seek answers from other players at the event or online. In these situations, openness and patience are key. Jokes are often made about the game of Magic itself. You know, the kind of humor that comes from being part of a specialized hobby. We share with each other the observations we make about the characteristics of a color, a particular commander, art style, or cards. This helps establish and reinforce the bonds that we have as members of this community, like when I just made a joke about stacks. But it is important when we're joking around with one another that we do so in a way that is respectful of a person's age, appearance, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, religion, or any other aspect of what makes them who they are. And most importantly, when we mistakenly offend someone, we apologize. We only weaken the bonds of community when our humor becomes mean-spirited. After the game is the time to ask some questions. How did each player feel about the game? Were the expectations set during the pre-game discussion met? We often view our games in terms of win or lose, but there are other things to examine. Consider speaking about specific moments and interactions that took place during the game. Congratulate players for the epic story moments that their plays created. Ask for advice if you were unhappy with your performance. If it was the first game with a new playgroup, there will likely have been some misalignments with expectations. And now is the time to correct that for the future. Magic the Gathering is a game we love because it brings people together. Without the gathering, we miss the opportunity to experience the trials and delights of playing decks that we have lovingly crafted against our friends, people in our local community, or even our global one. This ability to create a connection with other humans is core to me, and the reason I continue to play Magic to this day. While new cards will come and go, what will remain are the people that we connect with during our time playing this game. That is why the responsibilities that I've shared here are important, as they help us to do our best to support this community. I hope very much we get a game soon.
Next time on Shuffle Up and Play.
Today, bring your favorite or one of your most favorite Commander decks.
I have brought my dear beloved Grimgrin.
Brought the Mimeoplasm. And I brought Noyan Dawn.
And so I ask everyone to take their deck and please pass it to the right.
Of course. I want, this deck to win, specifically because it's mine.
But how would you feel if I killed you with your deck?
What does my commander do?
He's getting a better draw than I've ever gotten out of that deck. What do you want me to do?
The thing is he's good at Magic, and that's usually not the case.
Oh, good, a land that comes into play untapped, unlike every other land in this deck.
I'm like a proud father watching his son take his first steps.
Lady Luck smiles upon a British man.
Yeah.
Don't meow!